Good morning. I'm Nancy Weisler. I'm a member of the board of the Greenwich United Way, and I chair the United Way Community Planning Council. The Planning Council is hosting the legislative breakfast today. So on behalf of the Community Planning Council, I'd like to welcome and thank you all for attending. The Community Planning Council meets monthly to hear presentations on unmet human service needs in town. You can actually find summaries, if you'd like, of these presentations on our United Way website. The Planning Council has 40 members consisting of community volunteers, representatives from human service providers, and town departments. In addition, the Community Planning Council prepares the needs assessment, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, of the town's human service needs every 5 years. Would the members of the Community Planning Council who are here today please stand up so you can be recognized for your contribution to these efforts? All of you there, come on. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you for all you do on behalf of the community. I'd also like to acknowledge the help and the support that the Planning Council has received from Dr. Alan Barry, who's here someplace. I've seen him earlier. Okay, he is a member of our Planning Council, and he also serves on the Greenwich United Way's Advisory Board, and he is the Commissioner of the town's Department of Human Services. And finally, we'd like to thank the current and former Greenwich United Way Board and Advisory Board members who have joined us today for their support. Today, we're so fortunate to have members of our local and state government who can provide their perspective on our town's human service needs and what our government is doing to address them. I'd like to welcome and thank the members of our forum today. First Selectman Peter Chessy is coming, so we will welcome him when he arrives. But we also have State Senator Scott France, and we have State Representatives Mike Bacino, Fred Camillo, and Livy Florin. I'd now like to turn it over to the Greenwich United Way CEO, David Rabin.
Thank you, Nancy. I want to start with the focus of today's forum is on high priority human services needs that were identified in our most recent needs assessment, and those high priority needs are youth mental illness and substance abuse, basic human needs, and older adults. And today's format is going to be as follows. We will begin with a series of prepared questions that have been suggested by our Community Planning Council, focusing on these needs specifically. We are going to leave time at the end for audience questions. Now, if you have a question, can you hold it up? And we're going to have somebody come around and get them because we have a couple of questions already. But if you have it, hold it up at any time, and Jeremy or Bill will come around and grab it from you so we can ask those at the end. Welcome again to our legislators, and thank you for being here today. And congratulations to all of you for having passed that budget at the state level. That did address the $5 billion budget gap. We know there had to be compromises made, and we thank you for your hard work on that. So let's begin the forum. Our first question is for Scott France. Scott, it's a state budget question. We understand that the state budget will result in cutbacks for funding for some human services needs. We have two questions related to that. First, is there any plan to reduce state administrative costs to save money that could in turn be redirected to high priority human services needs? Second, many of the state departments serving human service needs work in isolation in Hartford and have large overhead. Should the state contract more of the services it is currently providing to more nimble and efficient local nonprofits?
Thank you, David, for the question, and thank all of you for showing up this morning at this early hour. It shows that you care, and that means a lot to all of us up here. So to answer the question, David, state government typically all across this country is the high-cost provider of services and goods to people. It's just the natural makeup of state government, and even, arguably at the local level, it naturally wants to grow. So overheads are going to be a lot bigger than they should be, certainly compared to the private sector. And the answer to the first part of the question is that if we do find savings, it's not so much that we can take that money and put it into the areas that we all feel so strongly about, which are these social service areas. It's that it can't be repurposed for that purpose. It has to go to balance the budget. And this is something that we have been saying, every one of us up here in the delegation have been saying for our entire careers up in Hartford, is that this, and this is very predictable, the structural expenses of state government are growing at such a rate that it will undoubtedly crowd out the important spending on social service programs, education, and other areas like that. And that's exactly what's happening right now. We've been saying that since day one, right, Fred? And Mike as well, and Libby as well. So it's sad what's going on because we're looking at structural expenses going from 22% to literally 52, 53% by the end of next calendar year. Structural expenses include debt service, contractual payments, and compensation to state employees and pension payments. So those are things that are very, very difficult to change. So I'm not optimistic that we're going to be able to improve things in that way. Where we can improve it is in other expenses of the state, and I think we can outsource. We can get into all this later if you want to, but outsourcing, I think, is one of the most important things that the state can do to save money, to free up these resources for social programs. We are, as a caucus, we're targeting savings of about $25 million this fiscal year and next fiscal year to put into some of the different social service programs specifically, but that's about the most that we can do before we run into a ceiling there. The state is growing because, for political purposes, states tend to grow. In Connecticut, it's growing at an unacceptable rate, about 6% per year, and you wouldn't believe, but some of these numbers are just so astronomical. The fringe benefit rate 2 years ago was 85%. Those of you in the private sector know that it's more like about 20 to 22%, something like that. Fringe benefit rate has been as high as 85%. It's now about 60-something percent. That's because we're just so inefficient at the state level dealing with the benefits and other compensation that employees get. So we're working on it as best we possibly can so that there are more resources for social services. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Our second question is for Peter. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning.
It's a town budget question. The new state budget has reduced funding for human service needs in order to balance the budget. How will the town address these gaps by increasing funding to nonprofits and/or encouraging public-private partnerships? If it is considering increasing town funding, how will it prioritize the pressing needs faced by our residents?
Great. Thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you. To talk about human services, here in the town of Greenwich, as you know, we have a human services department, and that department, led ably by Dr. Alan Berry, is at the forefront of partnering with many of your agencies to address the basic human needs. In the mission of that department, their overall objective is to promote services that foster self-sufficiency. The department's primary goals are to assist clients with meeting basic human needs for housing, food, clothing, personal safety, and health care. We have in the past several years, with the support of the BET and the RTM, provided funding to targeted programs that benefit at-risk populations within our schools and in society. Notably in our schools, we have the Kids in Crisis, with the counselors that are available 24/7 to help our middle school students who may be at risk for behaviors that are prone to develop at that period in their life, and to identify them early and to remediate them. With the YWCA of Greenwich, I'm delighted to support once again in this year's budget funding to support their domestic abuse services education program. Education is the key to all of our society ills, and we believe that getting in early and meeting with these young people to help them understand what's right and what's not right, what doesn't feel right, is critically important. And in many cases, they have been at the forefront of bringing to light serious domestic abuse issues in homes. We also rely upon TAG, which is a agency that provides transportation services to folks who have mobility issues. It's also assisting us with our senior population. I know one of the next questions down the pike is about how we address issues for seniors. They're an integral part about that. The question is, how do we go about determining that funding? And that has been, again, something we've utilized the Department of Human Services for. They are in the process of completing a results-based report showing achievement of clients reaching goals in the various areas that their mission is directed to, and that goes as well to the funding that is allocated. I will tell you from my perspective, I look at it very clearly, and if the funding requested is going to assist in protecting life safety, then it's going to receive my support. I don't think that's too subjective. I think it's fairly clear. There's probably some degree of subjectivity, but life safety is paramount.
Thank you, Peter. Our third question is for Mike, and the topic is substance abuse. It's been estimated that there will be about 1,000 overdose deaths in Connecticut this year, a 20% increase from last year. Research has shown that substance abuse is a chronic disease and that medically assisted treatments such as methadone and Suboxone can reduce opioid use and overdoses. Do you think there is adequate availability of this treatment option for addicts in our state? And if not, would you support greater access for treatment? And what other steps have been taken or planned to be taken, have been taken to address this crisis, Mike?
Thank you very much for that question. Thanks for having this forum, and thank you all for coming out today. This is an incredibly important topic that we've been dealing with here in the state of Connecticut and throughout the entire country, for that fact. We recently had a great program, which Dave, you were at, and as were the four of us, held by Alan Mathis and the Liberation Program in Stanford to discuss this particular topic. It's a widespread issue of addiction. Opioid abuse is one of the number one issues that we're dealing with in this country. What was discussed was the ways to go about treating those individuals. First and foremost, we in the legislature have provided new legislation to increase the education throughout the state about opioid addiction throughout all the municipalities. One of the other items that we've been talking about is putting together legislation about blister packs. And a blister pack is, if you can imagine, is your particular medications, like you would take a Z-Pack. It has 5 days the first, 4 the second. So you can actually see when those pills are gone. The problem is when most of the kids go, unfortunately, they'll take medication out of a bottle. It's hard to count those. So we're hopeful that this will be one step in the ability for you to recognize whether or not these pills have been missing. So that's an education type, that's a proactive step, as is the limitation of the amount of drugs that we're giving, allowing the pharmacies to give or the providers to give on a 5-day basis. When it comes to let's just talk about the methadone. And that's a medication that can treat the opioids addiction. It relieves pain. It's a non-opioid drug. Addictions are used to treat non-opioid drug addictions for substance such as alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, other things. What it does is it blocks the receptors in the brain that are affected by the opioids. This was a major part of the discussion at the Liberation Program. The methadone is used for mainly drug detoxification. It's proven that it is successful in the way that it's been managed and the way that it's been administered. The treatment's been around since the 1960s. It's intervening 40 years. It has become recognized as a standard for the opioid addiction. It is utilized in the state of Connecticut now. It is just not because this addiction, when we talk to people, they feel that this isn't, the average individual isn't aware of how dangerous this addiction is. So the first line of defense is educating the entire state, which we're doing. Every month comes out some sort of new commercial or community action awareness program that talks about addiction. But in the state of Connecticut, we've got 5 regions that have methadone clinics right now to be utilized. And in the town of Greenwich here, we've created, through the leadership of First Selectman Tessie and the board, a provincial council, which is the Human Services and GEMS, to look at all opioid addiction that occurs within our own municipality. So those steps are great first steps, but the problem is we need to continue this, and we need to continue this on working on the ground and hit the ground running through the high schools, through the elementary schools, and through the middle schools in the state of Connecticut.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Livy, next question is for you, and it's about children. The percentage of funding for children and families in the state budget has declined from 29.5% to 27% roughly. Research has shown that early intervention with young children not only determines their readiness for kindergarten, but also their future job prospects. How is the state addressing this need, and do you believe that more should be done to expand services in this area?
Thank you. And David, congratulations for finishing up your first year as our leader.
Oh,
It's
thank
been
you.
very, very successful. And I also want to thank Nancy Weisler and the Community Planning Council. I think these questions were the most thoughtful and on time, appropriate and on target and on task that we've had, and I appreciate that. I totally agree that early intervention in the lives of young children determines future scholastic and life success. Evidence shows that if a child cannot read at grade level by age 9, which is grade 3, he or she will be mired in a long-term achievement gap. Additionally, 60% of achievement deficit is evidenced by age 5. I believe in universal preschool. This has been very, very successful in Stamford for many years. And I also support programs like Care for Kids, Birth to 3, and Cradle to Career. Unfortunately, these state and federal programs have had their funding reduced, and we are looking to nonprofit, private providers to take up the slack. Greenwich United Way is among the primary leader in providing direct impact programs like the Early Achievement Gap Solutions Program. Parents as Teachers, which is a home visitation program for at-risk families for children ages birth to 3, and funding for the instructional coach for the preschools of Family Center and the YMCA will certainly provide needed services. Partnering with other nonprofit agencies like the Children's Learning Center, the Greenwich Alliance for Education, Kids in Crisis, and the Greenwich Department of Human Services is also key. However, I do not think that government should abdicate one of its missions, its core mission actually, which is public education. So to that end, I'm going to do everything in my power, and I know I speak for our delegation, everything that we can to maintain adequate state funding for early childhood education. Thank you.
Thank you, Liv. Fred, good morning. Your question is on mental illness. At the Greenwich United Way's Community Planning Council meetings, we've repeatedly heard about the long waiting times for mental health professionals, including those who are bilingual. What do you think the state can do to address this need?
Sure. Good morning. Thank you, David, for that question, and good morning, everybody. Thanks to the United Way for inviting us here today. The question of lack of bilingual professional mental health experts is something that I know I didn't remember ever getting any calls on in 9 years. I checked my emails and couldn't find any, but the Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services says there is obviously a problem, but they said the main obstacle to that is funding, and they urged organizations across the state to really prioritize when looking at this and trying to work with what they have, make it go really far, because everybody's, God bless you, is hurting for money, but they said they were pushing it back on the organizations around the state. And so I reached out to a mental health professional in Stamford, and she said that the problem is getting better. Not a whole lot, but it's getting slightly better. Interestingly enough, she did say that Spanish was not the language that was the biggest need, she thought, in Stamford. She said a lot of it is a lot of languages, and she specifically mentioned like Russian and French. They need some help there. But certainly, just because I have not gotten any calls on it doesn't mean it's not an issue here in Greenwich, too. It just means I think it's underreported.
Right. Thank you. Question number 6 is also for you, Fred, on basic human needs and mental illness again. Domestic violence is the #1 violent crime in Greenwich. Connecticut is one of a handful of states that does not have a law that requires police to determine immediately who the principal aggressor is in the case of domestic violence. Should Connecticut consider adopting such a law, and how likely is it that that would be passed?
Well, thank you for the question. I do support that. I have spoken with Mary Lee and the YW for several years on this. Back about 7 or 8 years ago on a related topic, we were told by the Office of the Victims Advocate it was kind of a Fairfield County, Greenwich problem, which was not true. But yeah, I would support that. I mean, if the primary, if there's a domestic abuse, somebody is assaulted, if there's not a clear confession or clear evidence, both people are going to most likely get arrested. And so this primary law, changing it to a primary aggressor law, which a lot of states do have, would serve as it's a deterrent for people. If you think you've been assaulted at home and if you make a call to the police that you're going to get arrested too, you're probably not going to make that call. And that's why probably a lot of this is underreported too. A lot of the police department, some law professionals are a little hesitant about this, partly because of funding, but I think they're under the opinion that they probably do have some of this training. I do want to say that our Greenwich Police Department here is working with the YWCA and trying to come to, I don't know if we're totally on the same page on that, but they're trying to work together on that. I think it's going to have to be for a law to be passed, we're going to have to certainly take the input of our professional law enforcement personnel and work with them, because it is a problem. And, despite the statistics that are out there, I think this one I'm pretty sure is underreported. So I certainly would work, and I know the delegation would too, to get the laws up there changed a little bit. And I have attended a couple of forums, and it's in Hartford, and it seems like a no-brainer and a layup, but nothing's that easy up there. And certainly this was a little bit more complicated than it would seem.
Thanks, Red. Peter, next question is for you on seniors. For the Medicare Savings Plan, the new state budget reduces the income at which seniors would qualify for assistance by about 50%. How do you think our low-income seniors who previously benefited from this program will be able to fill this gap?
Based upon my alliance here with my partner to the right, I understand there's going to be a special session that will address this. So I anticipate we're going to see some remediation to the change that resulted in this. Locally, in terms of Medicare, particularly Medicare Part D, our Commission on Aging does a wonderful job, Lori Contadino and her professional team, in advising our senior population on how they can go about getting more cost-effective prescription drug coverage and insurance supplemental coverage. This open enrollment began on October 15th and ends this week, December 7th. For those of you who know a eligible senior, I would encourage you to take advantage of it. I know several of our citizens who save thousands of dollars in costs, which certainly makes a difference if you're thinking about someone whose annual income is $40,000 or less living in Greenwich, Connecticut. So I would, encourage that, but expect to see some amelioration of the impact through the special session. I also had a request to share with you from Lori Contadino. And Lori, if you could help me with the acronyms here. On Thursday, December 12th at 1:30 in the Town Hall Meeting Room, which is right here, the Southwest Connecticut Area Agency on Aging, got that? Is making a presentation to the community about changes to MSP. So for those who did not hear the full response, I'll just repeat that the meeting by the Southwest Connecticut Area Agency on Aging is making a presentation in this room to discuss the impact of the changes to the Medicare Savings Program. And again, I want to take the opportunity to herald the agencies of the town. Particularly, I see some new faces in the audience who have We're going to be engaged in town government. Today is really an example to highlight just two that are on the forefront of addressing our citizen needs through the services they provide. The Department of Human Services under Alan Berry and the Commission on Aging under Lori Contadino. And again, I want to thank you both for what you do to make this town really what it is.
Thank you, Peter.
Good job, Peter.
Livy, our next question is for you on youth. One of the needs identified in our needs assessment is for opportunities for vocational training and schooling. How is the state addressing this need, and do you think that there are still gaps in service?
Thank you. Well, now, not every student is bound for college or a military career. In addition, businesses in Connecticut have job openings and need a workforce that is trained. And that is why our vocational technical high schools are of vital importance, and why my colleagues and I in the Stamford delegation have toiled since 2007 to rejuvenate J.M. Wright Technical School. The state granted us $90 million for the project, and we now have a complete 4-year program, and we are at full capacity in vocations like the culinary arts, property management, digital media, HVAC engineering, plumbing, and auto mechanics. These are skills which have immediate, well-paying employment available upon graduation. Now, my bonding committee has also invested in the other 17 VOTEC high schools. These schools serve more than 11,000 students in Connecticut. The technical education goes well beyond high school for those students who want to continue in the 12 community colleges and universities in our system. The Connecticut State College and University System is dedicated to providing an alternative, affordable, and rigorous educational continuum for those who wish. Now, in closing, I'd like to just take a little liberty with the words of Eleanor Roosevelt. And if a Republican can't take that liberty, who can? Okay. It isn't enough to talk about vocational education. One must believe in it. And it isn't enough to just believe in it. One must work at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Livy. Next question, Peter, is about seniors. Our needs assessment indicates that the percentage of residents 65 and older will continue to increase, reaching 20% in 2020. With that aging of our community, we can expect an increase in the incidence of dementia. What steps is the town taking to address these changing needs?
Thank you. And again, it gives me an opportunity to herald the work of our Commission on Aging. This year, the Commission on Aging has partnered with the Alzheimer's Association Connecticut chapter to support families and individuals who are diagnosed with this insidious disease. There are opportunities the second Wednesday of each month at the Senior Center to meet with licensed professionals to support families in developing a program to care for these individuals. In addition, the town works through its Public Works Department and the Commission to address capital improvements that support the mobility of seniors. That is an initiative of my office through the Disability Advisory Committee. I see Lise Jameson here as one of the members. So we work really in partnership to take a holistic approach on how we can best serve and provide for these individuals. Also, another treasured program and service is GADC River House. It's really truly about allowing seniors to age in place. I am dealing with one situation myself locally and another in another state with a family member who has been afflicted with dementia and the other with Alzheimer's. And it is extremely debilitating to the individual and a tragedy for the family. And the support that these programs like River House provide give the caregiver some relief from the obligations and some mental relief, because it does take its toll. So again, partnering with programs offered through the Commission on Aging and supporting them, as well as GADC, and then having a continuum of care when those programs meet their fulfillment in providing the service. Having a skilled nursing facility like Witherell is truly a security. So again, I think we're very blessed in Greenwich, but clearly and sadly to report, as you said, the numbers are increasing, and it's certainly something that we don't wish to deal with if we don't have to.
Right. Thank you, Peter. Question number 10 is for Mike on basic human needs. Under the new budget, the Earned Income Tax Credit, which has helped low-income and moderate-income residents, will be scaled back from 27% to 23%. What actions do you think can be taken to mitigate the impact on these residents, Mike?
That's a good question. First, just to give some background for perspective, at the state level, people who receive the Earned Income Tax Credit don't pay income tax. They get a tax refund check and exceeds the amount of taxes that they pay. The same thing happens on the federal level, except it's to a much greater extent. So a person could receive as much as $7,000 in the form of a tax refund, even though they didn't pay income tax. In Connecticut, the average earned income tax credit per person is approximately $565. The reduction in our budget will result in an average loss of about $84 for the year per earned income tax credit recipients. Now, our budget was not a great budget. It was the best budget that we could put together under the economic struggles that we are seeing in the state of Connecticut. But our budget prioritized what was most important. We had to make reductions to balance the budget, and unfortunately, the Earned Income Tax Credit was one of those reductions. But what we did do was we preserved other essential programs. We added money, as Livia had said, for Care for Kids. We put more money for Meals on Wheels. We preserved funding for the developmentally disabled and people with mental health issues, domestic violence as well, and included some income tax exemptions for Social Security. One of the things that we're looking at as ranking member on labor is we've had discussions on raising the minimum wage, but one of the aspects of that, or the other alternative solutions to that, is one that we're trying to foster is, as opposed to the minimum wages, is a possible increase in the Earned Income Tax Credit to offset that. But it's difficult at this time to be able to make some of those changes or put those initiatives forward because we need to regain the stability of the state of Connecticut's economy. We need to first create the structural changes needed that we're put forward in this budget so that we can, in the later months, move forward with readdressing the Earned Income Tax Credit and putting forward some more programs that will put these individuals back to work, give them more stability, put more money in their checking account so they can put more food on the table and create a better lifestyle for them and their families. So it's a work in progress, as everything is here up in the state of, in Hartford, but it's one that we're finally optimistic about because we used to have a saying that due to recent cutbacks, the light at the end of the tunnel has been turned off. Well, we're starting to slowly pay the bills to get that turned back on, so we're hopeful that it'll be moved forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And question number 11 is for Scott on structural reforms. Connecticut has lagged most states in the economic recovery since the 2008 recession. This has intensified the pressure on the state budget, which has in turn necessitated cuts to many human service programs. Does the new state budget include structural reforms that will stimulate economic growth? And what additional structural reforms can be achieved that will promote job growth, helping our unemployed and underemployed, and providing more funding for human services needs?
Thank you, David, for that question as well. There's no question that that Connecticut has one of the most pathetic records, certainly in the Northeast, if not the entire country, in terms of economic and job recovery. Since 2008, we lost a lot of jobs, and we've only gotten 78% of those jobs back since the beginning of the Great Recession. Whereas our geographical neighbor, Massachusetts, what's the difference? We're basically the same thing, except for the city of Boston, which is a thriving, wonderful city. We should have 5 thriving, wonderful cities, but we don't here in Connecticut necessarily. They've gotten back 300% of the jobs that they lost, 300%. Rhode Island has close to 200%. Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, averaging about 180 to 200% of the jobs lost recovered. So what's wrong with Connecticut? And I would argue, I think we'd all argue up here, that it's the balance sheet of this state. It's our addiction to having spending increases that are way too high every single year for far too long. For 45 years now, we've been growing the state budget at close to 6.3%. It's completely unsustainable. So the structural changes that you're asking about were actually, for the first time, on a bipartisan basis put into the budget, which is great. I mean, this is truly historic. I know it's hard to get excited about budgets and things like that, numbers and all that kind of stuff, but this is really neat because you've got 85 to 90% of both chambers voting in favor of a single budgetary document. It may never happen again, but I hope it does, because we did make some great inroads in that we were able to get into this budget the whole idea of a spending cap. Since the income tax was implemented back in 1991, the people of Connecticut cried out for a spending cap in 1992, and there had to be a constitutional amendment, which did occur. But it was never implemented. There are all these little tricks you can pull in politics in Hartford, so that you may say this in writing, but you don't actually have to implement it or execute it because the language is not there to actually implement it. So they didn't, for 25 years, define what CPI meant, what Consumer Price Index meant, or personal income. I mean, you read these numbers every day in the Wall Street Journal. Why can't they just use those? So that was their excuse for 25 years. It's now in the budget. There is actually a bona fide spending cap. There's a bonding cap. The governor, who controls the bond commission, is a rubber stamp committee. Been on it for about 5 years now. It's pathetic. Just the other day, it was last Wednesday, we went through an agenda of 52 items. Libby's on it as well. She was there. 53 items in 24 minutes, $1 billion in borrowing. $1 billion plus in borrowing. If you continue to borrow like that, it's just unsustainable. We're in a low interest rate environment right now. The only way for interest rates to go is up, and it's going to put more pressure on all of the funding we were just talking about that goes to all of the programs that you all care about and we all care about so much and dearly. So that's in there. Labor contracts have to come in front of both chambers for the first time ever in the history of the state of Connecticut for approval. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. We are doing pretty well on time. That's the end of our set questions, and I'm going to call up Jeremy Nappy now. Are there any additional? Oh, Elliot, good, thank you. Jeremy Nappy, our Director of Development at the Greenwich United Way. He's going to read the audience questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone who has submitted questions. Please note we, through review, Bill and I focused on the ones that were human service oriented, as that is why we're here today. So the first question comes, what do you believe the most pressing youth issues are? How do you see these issues being addressed on the local and state level? And finally, how can local organizations help that process?
I'm happy to take a, what's the word? I don't want to say take a step. Take a whack.
Whack at it.
Get up at bat. I'm not an athlete, so
Stab. You could say stab.
So I just, first and foremost, locally, I am very proud of the First Selectmen's Youth Commission, which was formed several years ago for the purpose of providing voice to our youngest citizens, and that in itself has taught me a great deal. Being a parent of elementary-age school children, my own experience has been, and I don't think this is novel in saying, that our youth today are facing so many pressures to perform in academic, in athletics, to meet societal stereotypes and norms, particularly in a community of abundance like Greenwich. There's a tremendous amount of competition with everything that's done. And I say to myself, well, why is that? Well, we only have to look in the mirror and look at ourselves to know that we are instilling that in our children. And so I think in order to address just the environment in which our children are raised, we need to look at ourselves and perhaps reset what we prioritize as important in our lives. And, I know there's tremendous work being done through the Board of Education to address achievement, and that is certainly an important endeavor, because without education, as was highlighted, I think, in Representative Floren's question, at the earliest ages, truly those young people don't have a fighting chance, in my opinion. So I think if we're going to allocate finite resources to our young people, let's front load it. Let's determine how best to measure their achievement and performance, early testing to identify various learning disabilities and different impediments would be well served to then not have to remediate the costs much later and have those students feel ashamed or feel less than whole. So I think early on, identification of issues with our young people and providing a supportive environment. And to address the issue of substance abuse, again, I want to just emphasize my view, there is no shame in admitting one has an addiction of any kind. I think the fact that you're able to feel supported in stating what your addiction is and what your issue is so important in this community. And we should all be leaders in saying, we're here for you, we will help you. No shame in admitting your addiction, but we can help you. And that's my best
Thank you, Peter.
sense of what I feel as not only a leader, but as a parent as well.
Thank you, Peter. Livy for the state.
Yeah, and I truly agree with everything our first selectman said. And I've been so impressed with Greenwich not only works on IQ, but the values of EQ, which is emotional quotient, and the value system, civility. There are programs against bullying, the program at the high school that names Do Count. All of this leads into me seeing a whole person educated. And that also helps self-esteem, which I do think has the trigger of addiction if not handled early on and well. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone? Yeah. Next question deals with the opioid crisis. On the issue of opioids in Greenwich, where do you think the town is vulnerable, and what concrete steps can be taken to cover these holes, especially when it comes to youth and seniors?
Since I had the opioid question, only appropriate. So again, the town of Greenwich has done some magnificent work, with the prevention council that they've already established. With the opioid addiction, the thing is this: as much as we talk about wanting to make sure that the kids are educated, which we have to make sure we do, most important thing in this world is health is our health. I mean, and keeping these kids, part of health is keeping them safe. And that's why it's imperative that, and we've talked about this in the legislature, that we start at an early age to get the children, and not only the children, but the parents, to understand the addiction potential that's out there when it comes to opioids. And the fact that they are so readily available in the household currently. And it's maybe not your household, but it may be at the grandparents' household, which the majority of the time it is. And one of the most disturbing things that I've found going up into Hartford, listening to some of the people coming in talking, are what they call these pill parties. And the high school kids would everybody would come to a party, they'd all empty the pills into a thing, and then they'd just grab one and see what happened. That to me was just horrific, okay? So I think the best way that we're suited to aggressively attack this is through education, is through having that discussion, is making the parents have that initial discussion with their children at a very early age, and not just have that one discussion. They need to have repetitive discussions as those children start to age. My children, we have a discussion when you're 6 years old, when you're going in, and it's a very calm, quiet, relaxed one. And as they start to get a little bit older, my oldest is now 12, we have a little bit sterner of a conversation. It's one that's a little bit more eye-opening and one that's more real. And I think that's what really needs to happen. It's getting the parents involved. The town is working their best, but the hands are locked as far as what the town can and cannot do. We've got to get into the households, and we've got to get these people to understand the severity of this issue.
Libby?
Thank you, Mike. I agree with everything. We've spent also a lot of, we've invested money in tracking prescriptions and educating doctors. And we're working with the health center at UConn to have a statewide registry so people know. I mean, a lot of these drugs are accumulated because people doctor shop. And one doctor doesn't know what the next one has prescribed. Well, that's going to stop. And in addition, I think we've invested in having drug disposable drop-offs. Like there's one at our public safety building that's 24/7, that's accessible. And when you've taken all of whatever your prescription warrants and you have leftovers, don't leave them in your medicine cabinet. Drop them off safely in this locked box. And we've done that throughout the state as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott?
The only thing I'll add very briefly is Alan and ICE did a program a couple of weeks ago in Stamford, and the delegation was there. Larry Kudlow was also there. Larry Kudlow is an amazing case study in recovery. He was essentially on his deathbed due to alcohol and serious drug abuse. And he recovered is a spectacular success today, both as a human being, but also on TV, as a financial analyst and an economist, et cetera, et cetera. But his message was simply this, and this is just, your take home today is tell your kids, tell anybody else who is younger, do not get anywhere near these opioids. It is the equivalent of taking a grenade and taking the pin out and then releasing it. It will kill you. It will kill you. Don't do it, period.
Peter?
I just want to reaffirm what our esteemed state senator has said in terms of the work that Liberation Programs is doing, not only in Greenwich, but throughout the region. And there are 2 locations here in Greenwich, is that right? The YMCA? And at Greenwich High School for students who feel the affliction and need the intervention. And again, I also will come back and just say that I think a lot of it could emanate from modeled behavior. We all have this level of sense there's a solution to everything, so when something ails us, immediately resort to a pill. Certainly I'm not advocating following medical professionals' advice, but I also think we're all too quick to reach for something that might, in some instances, just need a holistic approach and be less dependent upon pharmaceuticals. And I think that's, again, a societal thing, and it's an adult thing. In closing, as we're in the holiday season, it's cheer, everyone has a drink, but how many times has some of us come home from work or at something, and we're celebrating and we're modeling that, okay, drinking is fine, but in moderation. Because young people they're sponges, they absorb it. They say, gee, mom and dad go out and drink every Friday night. Well, is that really the message we want to instill in our young people?
Thank you. And our final question that we have at the moment is about unmet human services needs in the town. All of our questions today have focused on those high priority human service needs identified in the Greenwich United Way 2016 needs assessment. Given the rapidly changing economic and social landscape, are you hearing of any other critical needs which we should focus on as a community?
It just comes down to funding is what I hear the most. I mean, I think you've identified all of the needs and then some, and there's always room for improvement, but it does come down to resources, both human resources and financial resources.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that is Livy's 100% correct. We've met through the United Way with a lot of the organizations that are here today with, I see Dennis Perry out there, Ableist, and Alan's here as well as the Y and YWCA. Funding is a very tricky thing these days because there are so many new organizations and everybody is looking for a piece of the pie. And in the state of Connecticut, again, we have difficult times ahead of us. So it's imperative that we continue. We're very fortunate here in the town of Greenwich. We are, as many differences as we may have if we're called to do something, if there's a need, and I'll use Kids in Crisis as an example, there's a need for Kids in Crisis, they're cut from the state budget. What do? We roll up our sleeves in the town of Greenwich and we come to the assistance and aid. And that's a fantastic thing that we have here. That's one of the reasons why we have so many wonderful people staying here in the town of Greenwich. Because of these wonderful services, we need to make sure that we continue to do that, because the funding is something that is a very, very difficult thing for these organizations to maintain the level of expertise that they want. We take for granted because we do think, well, we're in Greenwich, we're fine, everybody's fine. It's not the case. There are fundraisers that are going on now, and we need to make sure that we spread the word so that all of these individuals have the proper, needs that they need, to make their experiences, the people's experiences in these organizations, whether it's seniors, children, developmentally disabled, the best experiences that they possibly can. And I think that is a wonderful testament to the town, but we need to make sure that we maintain doing that. The one other thing that there is a lapse in is when it comes, I just wanted to say on the education aspect of it, is at 3 o'clock for a lot of children in the town of Greenwich, education stops because there's no place for them to go, or there's no continuing part of that education in the household. Now, there are many, many varietal different reasons for that, but one of the things that would be great is if we were able to get into those homes and get to these parents to say, reading is important. It's whether you're reading with your child, whether that child is maybe he's an English second language, read a book that's in Spanish. All of our libraries have them. But as long as they're reading and the parents are engaged, that will move mountains for some of these children.
Fred?
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick addition to echo what my colleague said. Funding is critical, obviously, but a lot of these organizations, whether it be Ableist, the Greenwich Adult Daycare Center, or the Greenwich Boys and Girls Club, I saw Bobby D'Angelo here before, do a terrific job all around this town. But if there's, you don't have money is tight. They always do need some help. A little sweat equity. Volunteering is the greatest thing in the world, what you get out of it, and they are always open to that. And Mike said that after 3 o'clock, education stops. A lot of parents are, the kids are in a two-parent working household. So the Greenwich Boys and Girls Club, organizations like that, that's where they come in. So, if you can't, if money is a little tight, certainly if you have a few hours to give, that would be greatly appreciated by them and the kids. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now I'd like to call back up Nancy Weisler.
Well, I'd like to thank Peter, Scott, Mike, Fred, and Livy for participating in our forum today and for their service to the community. I think we covered so many critical issues facing our community, and I feel encouraged that we have such strong community partners, town governmental services, both at the state and the local level, to address so many of these challenges. I'd like to thank the staffs of both the Greenwich United Way and the Town Hall for their help in organizing this meeting. And I'd like to thank Channel 79 and Don Conway back there for taping today's meeting, and it will be posted to YouTube and to FIAS. I'd like to highlight 2 upcoming Greenwich United Way events in the new year. First, the Community Planning Council on Tuesday, April 17th, will host a forum at 8:30 a.m. in this meeting on the Early Childhood Achievement Gap. Livy Florin mentioned this program, and it's a new initiative for us because in 2018, the United Way is planning to launch this initiative with its community partners, family centers, the YMCA, and the Greenwich Public Schools, and other partners such as the Department of Human Services, to provide much-needed services to at-risk children from birth to age 5 so they can enter kindergarten on a level playing field. And our forum in April will feature some of the research that supports this program. Also in April, the Greenwich United Way will host its annual Soul Sisters Luncheon that raises critical funding to address many of the human service needs we discussed today. We hope you can join us for both these events, and we'll be in touch to let you know about them in terms of timing. So thank you so much for attending today, and best wishes for the holiday season. Thank you.